unto them, Fear not, for I am in the place of God. But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it for unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them, and spake kindly unto them. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation, the children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, who brought up upon Joseph's knee. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I died, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Again, we have been looking for many months now, or many weeks specifically, about this covenant that God made with Abraham. He passed that covenant on to Isaac. He passed it on to Jacob. And now Joseph is reminding them that God is going to take care of them. They are in the difficult place, living right outside the land of Egypt, but God would bring them to the promised land just as he had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. As we started into this series last week, we took a moment to realize that there are many areas of life that can cause people to become broken and incapable of realizing or really accomplishing what they feel responsible for. We mentioned that broken people tend to be physically or emotionally crushed by the weight of the situation that they are facing. And you and I are going to see Joseph being crushed on every side by the situations that are brought into his life because of a dream that he had. And so what you realize is that in these moments, you and I often see people who are facing an emotional collapse. They're feeling overwhelmed, isolated, or crushed under the burden of the weight that they're going through. We saw some of that as Jacob fled his house last week because of a decision he made. It's interesting as you look at Joseph, you don't see a lot of that. Now, you and I aren't given in great detail the days in and out of his prison sentence. You and I aren't given in detail what took place for those hours in the pit. But the reality is you don't see this crushing weight as God breaks Joseph. You see this blessing that he seems to have that faith to walk through just very difficult situations for the glory of God. A lot of psychological information around this idea of people being broken talks about the nature or the nurture aspects of the home. As we read through Joseph's story this morning and on Wednesday, we see that Joseph was born into Jacob, or as we saw last week, Israel, who Jacob became. One of the biggest problems that we saw that Jacob had to face was the fact that he was Rebekah's favorite and Esau was Isaac's favorite. And that caused some heated debate within the brothers. It caused some problems. Right? How many of you think that if there are those kinds of problems between two people, if you add another 10 more, that's going to exponentially cause problems? And as you read through Isaac's story, or Jacob's story, you realize he has 12 boys that are counted, really 13, but 12 when all of the problems start. And what you find is Jacob thought it was a good idea to act like his father Isaac and play favorites. We won't read it, but Jacob creates this coat for Joseph that fuels the fire of the brothers' hatred and we see this problem in his home arise. Notice Genesis 37:3 tells us that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Isn't it interesting that by the leading of the Holy Spirit, Moses felt it important to tell us why Joseph was Jacob's favorite? Because he was old, and he got the son that he wanted from his wife, his beloved there. And it almost makes it sound, I know Moses isn't meaning to make it sound like this, but it almost makes it sound that Jacob was justified in loving Joseph more than the others because he was a son of old age. Notice that we find the problem in verse 4. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. Now, in your notes, you'll see in the Digging Deeper section again, Genesis chapter 37, Genesis chapter 38. This is where we get a good glimpse into the home life of Joseph through his family's actions. We're going to talk more about that on Wednesday night in our Digging Deeper. But what you and I understand and need to remember is that there is a possibility that if God is choosing to allow us to be broken, it's no fault of our own. We're going to see some of that breaking down in Joseph's life in just a moment. But what we realize is we did not choose to be born into the home we were born into, or in the line of children that we were born into. We didn't choose our siblings or the chores around the home. Those were thrust into our lives. And you and I can agree that there are homes that just suck from the psychological human perspective. But here's the thing that I pray you and I see from Joseph's dream and his difficult situations in life is that our brokenness can lead to a defining moment that no one but God could see coming. Everybody and thing around us seemed to be pressing against us, but God knew something about us far greater than probably we ourselves could have even thought or dreamt like Joseph. So, would you notice with me, first of all, in Genesis chapter 37, Joseph's declaration. Joseph's declaration. I don't care how many times I corrected spelling Joseph. I don't know why I could never put the E in the right place. So hopefully you can put the right E in the right place. But we're not told why Joseph felt the need to tell his family, both with great clarity and frequency, his dreams. But one thing we are for sure is that Joseph let them know. Now we're going to again talk about some of that on Wednesday night. But Joseph declares 2 times his dream. Let's start in Genesis chapter 37, verse 5. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. How many of you right there would be like, you know what? I probably shouldn't say anything else. Well, that's not what takes place. Verse 6. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream that I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheep arose, and also stood upright, and behold, your sheep stood around about, and made obeisance to my sheep. And his brethren said unto him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and his words. All right? So Joseph declares his dream to his brother. He tells them, hey, look, I had a dream. They hate him. Hey, look, here's what the dream was. They hated him yet the more. How many would say, now would be a good time to stop talking? Joseph doesn't stop talking. He carries on. Verse 9. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to the earth. And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same. Envied really is actually this word despised. And his father, Jacob, began to really think through what was being said. Now, I am sure we're all sitting here thinking, of course they hated him. He's arrogant. He's gloating. He's whatever we want to fill in the blank with, as he declares that people are going to bow to him. People are going to give to him the praise of being a leader over them. And again, there's a lot of discussion around Joseph's dream and how he related to his family. But for this morning, I simply want to point out that Joseph seems to be being led by God to greatness, and his brothers just want him 6 feet under the ground. You ever had that feeling somebody wants me dead? And so Joseph is given this dream, and it would give any one of us, if we truly understood the dream like Joseph was given, great excitement about our life. We would be excited. Oh, God is going to use me for greatness. God's going to do something in my life to allow me to impact other people. But notice in this second thought what Joseph receives because of his dream and his declaration. Joseph receives, number 2, we see Joseph's difficulty. You ever see those old movies when someone's servant is feeding them fruit and this great person is just lavished with the fans and the fruit, and we all think to ourselves, man, that would be incredible, right? This would be laying out by the pool, somebody feeding me, somebody fanning me, and we would tend to think that should be the way Joseph's life went because he was given this dream that people were going to bow down to him. Now, we don't see arrogance in Joseph's story, but I'm sure as Joseph thought about his dream, he thought, man, it is going to be awesome to have my family serving me. I think any 17-year-old would think that way. But let's notice the next moment of Joseph's life. Genesis chapter 37, verse 13. And Israel said unto Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, here am I. All right, think about this. Joseph has this dream. You're going to have your brothers bow down to you, your father and your mother, whether it's Jacob and Leah and Rachel, or just Jacob and Rachel. It is what it is, but that's the dream that he's given. And what you find here is Joseph isn't being served by his brethren. Joseph is serving his brothers. And so Joseph is not in authority over his father, and Jacob is still telling Joseph what to do. So how many times in our life have we given up on God because we read some scripture, we had some feeling, maybe we even had a dream like Joseph, and yet nothing in our life has changed for the better because God is leading us in something else first. But what you see Joseph saying here is, all right, you want me to go feed my brothers? Here I am, Father. I will go and feed my brothers. What a attitude of the heart here that we see from Joseph. So Joseph's following his father's lead. We find in verse 18 that his brothers see him coming, and they begin to think about the possibility, verse 18 tells us, of slaying him. They want to kill him. All right? So again, Joseph had this dream. Now his brothers are really contemplating, how do we put him 6 feet under the ground? But notice verse 19. And they said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, let us slay him, and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. What are they going after? They're going after the declaration of Joseph. They are saying, I don't want any part of seeing this dream fulfilled. Therefore, we will come up with this elaborate plan to make Joseph's life ultimately null and void, but certainly difficult as we see it going farther. Joseph's dream leads him into a difficult encounter with his brothers. But what we see, as the old saying goes, cooler heads prevail. Reuben challenges his brothers not to kill him just yet. He thinks he's got a way to get him out. As he goes away, his brothers see some merchants coming along the way, and they come up with a better idea. They think to himself, why should we just kill our brother and have to work all of this, or do all of this labor to work out a story that our father believes us that he was killed by an animal? How about, let's get a little profit out of the situation. Notice verse 26. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content, and they were passed by Midianite merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. All right. How many of you thinking to yourself, you know, the more you read out of Joseph's life, the less I want to dream like Joseph. We again, get it in our minds. We get this dream, it's going to happen in a moment. And what we see all throughout Scripture is God tends to allow a lot of difficulty in people's life before that dream is fulfilled. So Joseph's passed into Pharaoh's home, or Potiphar's home there in Egypt. And what you find is this very difficult life of servitude being played out in Egypt. And we might say, as we think about this idea of being sold into Potiphar's home, if there's somewhere to serve, that's a good place to serve. And we might think to ourselves, all right, this is difficult. It could be worse. I'm going to put in my great effort. Maybe I'll get some recognition as I serve well in the home. And that's what you find out of Joseph's life. He is allowed to raise up in the ranks of servitude. He's trusted with everything that Potiphar has, and things seem to be looking good for Joseph. Yet, notice, Genesis chapter 39, verse 6, that we realize that that dream job leads into a nightmare. Sometimes people will ask how I'm doing. I will say I'm living the dream, one nightmare at a time. How many of you ever been in that situation, right? And that's where we seem to find Joseph right now. Notice what it says, Genesis 39, verse 6. And he, Potiphar here, left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things, that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and said, lie with me. All right. Joseph is now between a rock and a hard place, so to speak. See, he's supposed to be being served by his brothers. Joseph, though, has found himself being thrown in a pit. He's been picked out of that pit, thrown into slavery. Slavery leads to a bit of a blessing, and now he's being tempted to dig himself his own grave, because there is no right choice here in human perspective, through the human perspective. Yet we find Joseph resists the temptation, and yet we read in verse 11, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went up into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she, Potiphar's wife, caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and he fled and got him out. Now again, I think all of us would say, there is nothing easy going on about Joseph's life here, even though God had given him this dream. Now, to add insult to injury, verse 20 tells us that Joseph's master took him, put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. Think about this. Joseph is supposed to be on the throne. But because of this dream that he told to his brethren, he's no longer in a pit any longer, but he's in the pit of a prison. Yet we find again that Joseph doesn't roll over, throw his life away, but he serves God while in prison, and he finds himself running up the ranks in the prison house. While in prison, he meets the Pharaoh's butler and the baker, and we find who found themselves thrown in prison as well. He begins to interact with them. Things tend to be looking good for Joseph as he was promised to be remembered when the butler is released. Genesis chapter 40 verse 23 then tells us the chief butler didn't remember what he promised Joseph, but forgot him. And what's the Bible say there? His great life. You think about the fact that the butler is released. He's able to live in the benefits of the home of the highest ranking official there. He's able to go about, and Joseph is stuck in prison. How many of us at this point would say, God, just you keep the dream. I don't even want to remember it any longer. Just let me out of this situation so that I can get back to a good life that I feel like I was having in my father's house. Isn't it interesting that that's where God's enemy wants to get us? He wants us to give up on the dream that God has placed in our hearts, that he is leading us towards, even if it means walking through some difficulties. How many of you are starting to think that Joseph would have been better off never to have that dream? Well, I would probably think the majority of us aren't thinking that way because we know the end of the story. And so you see that by the time that the dream is starting to be fulfilled, Joseph is now 39 years old. All right? How many of you are willing to go through a difficult day? How many of you are even willing, now that you look back, to go through maybe a difficult year, 2020? All right? I'll take a year. God, get me out of 2020, never return. How about 22 years of difficulty? That's what we see Joseph walking through day in and day out. You say, well, hold on a minute here. Joseph eventually got out of that prison because the Pharaoh had a dream. Joseph was able to be remembered. He gave the answer to the dream. How many of you think once you realize that dream is about famine, Joseph is given a position of authority? How many of you know there's going to be some difficulty that's coming in the life of Egypt and the people surrounding them as they have to really tighten the belt, so to speak, so they can get through this famine? So, again, he might not be in prison, but how many of you say he's not walking on a bed of roses? Again, I don't even know why I wrote that down because I can't even imagine walking on a bed of roses because that would hurt. But Joseph is given the challenge to face broken people, begging for anything to survive, and this is where Joseph's story finally seems to take a turn, and that's where we see, number 3, Joseph's defining moment. Notice Genesis chapter 45 and verse 1. Again, 22 plus years it took Joseph to get here. But I believe with all my heart, if Joseph didn't have a faith in God for those 22 years, there would have never been this defining moment for Joseph. Genesis 45, verse 1. And again, let me just give you some background because we're skipping a lot of things in Joseph's life to get here. Joseph's brothers had finally come to try and seek help from Egypt because the famine had gotten so bad into their land. Joseph realized who they were. He had some conversations with them, and we come to this point now, Genesis 45, verse 1. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, because every man to go out from me, and there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brother. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that you sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. Let's just pause there for 2 seconds. That's a defining moment. How many of you right now today could say, my siblings hate me. My siblings go to kill me, yet decide to sell me into slavery. I'm set in slavery, and I get thrown in prison, not of my own wrong, but somebody else's lie against me. I'm forgotten in prison because my brothers ended up sending me to Egypt. I get stuck in prison for all of these years, and how many are thinking to themselves, today I would say, hey, don't be grieved. Don't be afraid to approach me. God sent me here for our benefit. I'm not 100% sure I'm there spiritually. I would like to believe that I am, but how many of you know that's a defining moment in Joseph's life? That clearly shows us where Joseph's faith was. Notice verse 6. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be airing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it is not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say unto him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not. What a statement that Joseph makes at a defining moment of his life. You did not send me here. What's the 2 words? But God. If you and I, in our difficulty, can keep our focus on God, there are going to be moments in our life that can come up where we can make statements just like this. But our focus has to be on the God of the Bible rather than on the going-ons around us. And that's where Joseph was. Joseph was already there seeing the struggle of the Egyptians. He knew how bad things were. He knew how bad things were going to get. He knew how bad things were on the nations around him. But he knew how bad things were getting to impact the direct family that he was born into. For 22 years, Joseph had walked through the fires of difficulty, and he's at this moment he dreamed of as a 17-year-old young man. What a defining moment. How sad is it that we watch families and churches fill up with bitterness rather than betterness because of how they were treated? Please don't for a second think I'm sweeping hurt under the rug. But what we do with hurt is ultimately going to define who we become. Moses tells us here, Joseph was broken, but not bitter. Joseph, for 1 second, in 22 years, didn't stop loving his family. His family broke him, but Joseph displayed his burden for them when he could have easily retaliated with the authority that God had given to him. He could have had the heart of his brothers. He could have had the mind of his brothers that they had for him earlier. But yet you find in all that is happening in Joseph's life, all that had happened up to this moment no longer mattered. His brothers were being reunited with him. We'll see some of it on Wednesday, but notice we are told Joseph weeps for the opportunity to both see his family and his father in the moment of their crisis. He knows that he has been given the opportunity to be a blessing to his family instead of being bitter towards his family. So Joseph takes a moment in his life that could have been a tool for Satan to wipe the Israelites, the line for which the promised Messiah would come, off the face of the earth. And in this moment, he declares victory through brokenness. How often do we find ourselves fighting against God's breaking techniques because we are going to get what we deserve? Or we're going to get that dream no matter the cost to anyone in the way. We are going to live out that dream no matter the wake of destruction we leave behind us. But see, Jacob got his dream after the brokenness. Joseph got the brokenness after the dream. It doesn't matter when we get the dream, it matters what we do with the brokenness. Joseph displays for us here, in this defining moment, that he allowed God to be at the center of it all, no matter what situations were presented to him in his life. And so the truth is what puts the pin in our defining moment. God is at the center. God's glory is seen throughout the earth. God gets rejected. Man's glory is seen throughout the earth. What's the pin? Is it God's glory or is it our good? Is it men rejecting us or God rejecting us? You're going to be remembered by what you did with God and what the decision led you to do in the inflection points of your life. And what you find is every inflection point in Joseph's life had this pin of God at the center. He told Potiphar's wife, how can I do this and sin against God? He wasn't even worried about Potiphar. He was worried about God. He has this inflection point with his brothers. And he's not so much worried about the pit and about the murderous heart. He is worried about what God was doing in his life at the moment. I want you to understand, you're going to be remembered by what you did with God. And so, can I encourage you this morning to assess what you are choosing to do with God today and what you have been choosing to do with God up to this point? Think about the fact that your family, in your mind, might suck like Joseph's did. But how are you choosing to respond? Your co-workers, or in Joseph's life, your cellmates suck like the butler and the baker. But what are you choosing to do in the moment? Your environment, it sucks like the famine in the land of Egypt. But what are you doing with God, and how are you responding in that moment? We all have defining moments. But there is never a better testimony left behind than one that is lived out by the grace of God, because the faith that we had in God, not just for the great dream, but during the great difficulty. You and I had the faith to walk through the difficulty so that we could see from the other side what God was actually saying to us. So let's draw this to a close by coming back to that great one-liner from Joseph in Genesis chapter 50. Genesis chapter 50. And we're starting to see what we started with. Verse 19, and Joseph said unto them, fear not, for am I in the place of God? We would say it this way. I'm right where God wanted me to be. What a statement. But then verse 20. But as for you, you thought it evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. I wonder this morning, are you like Joseph, truly in the place God wants you, both physically and spiritually? Are you engaged in the life that God has called you into with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength? If not, I think you need to ask yourself the question, why? What temptation has been introduced into your life that you are struggling to say, like Joseph, how can I do this thing and sin against God? Are you able, like Joseph, to say, life's not been awesome? We might say it this way: the government seems to be against me. My job seems to be against me. My cars are evil. And the weather in the desert even seems to be against me. But God is using it all for His good. Remember this morning, you and I cannot direct people to the glory of God if the glory of this world is all about us. Some of the greatest testimonies that have been shared are from a life of brokenness. I am not suggesting this morning you leave this place and run headlong towards being broken. But I will say, don't try to run fast out of the brokenness. Because like Joseph, you and I have no idea what we might be able to save or who we might be able to save because we allowed God to use our brokenness for His glory and other people's good. That's what you and I get to see with Joseph as a broken person and a big dream. You and I have the ability to see we too, by the grace of God, can walk through difficult moments and lead people to the glory of God because God has given us the faith to believe the dream that God has put in our hearts. No matter how many years of difficulty we have to walk through, we're going to stand and give God the glory because it is God who is the one that deserves the glory in both the good and the bad. We're going to sing in just a second. But before we do, I want us to pause and pray. I wonder this morning, how would you react if you are in the face of Joseph's brothers like Joseph was? Maybe God's spoken to you that your heart's not sold out to God to react for the betterment of other people and your own life for the glory of God. Maybe this morning you're walking through some difficulty and you are just absolutely begging God to get you out or you're about to give up. Maybe this morning you'd say, God, I don't want to give up. Give me the faith I need, like Joseph had, to continue to walk through the difficulty as long as you want me to walk through it. Maybe this morning you're on that other side. And today's the day where you get to just praise God for all His glory. God, I'm living out the dream that You've put in my heart. May You help me to share that dream with other people so that they might see Your glory. They might know You put people exactly where You want them for Your name's sake. Maybe it's a moment of prayer, maybe it's a moment of praise, but I want to encourage you to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit and do as the Holy Spirit is leading. Would you pray with me?